Good evening, councillors, and welcome to the meeting of the Planning Committee, which is undertaken virtually in accordance with the enacted government regulations during the current coronavirus pandemic. We've been doing this for quite a long time, so you should all know this, but listen carefully. Before the meeting starts, can I please remind members to ensure you mute your microphones when you're not speaking, remain focused on the topic being discussed. Please try to avoid repeating points which have already been made. At the beginning of each item, I'll ask councillors who wish to speak on the item to indicate through the blue hand signals, primarily followed by physical hand raise on the camera, and I will keep a note of them, as will the members of Democratic Services, and I will call you in the order I have you. Please avoid interrupting other councillors and respect the position of the chair. The voting method will be roll call to ensure clarity. And we'll remind you of all of this when we get to that point. Please remember that this meeting is being broadcast in the normal way via Facebook Live, and that the public can hear what is being said and decided on, and can see councillors as well. Please therefore take care to prevent distractions should you need to step away from the screen at any time, and please stop your video feed. With all those matters in mind, can I ask Howard Bassett to do a roll call of all councillors and officers to ascertain who is in attendance?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bialik.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Branston.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Fowle.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hannaford.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Henson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Sparks.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Morse.
Present.
Thank you. I shall now ask those officers in attendance to confirm that they are present. Director, City Development, Housing and Supporting People, Bindu Arjun.
Present.
Assistant Service Lead, City Development, Roger Clotworthy.
Present.
Principal Project Manager, City Development, Paul Jeffrey.
Present.
Thank you. Project Officer Planning, Lee Powell.
Present.
Thank you. And you're supported tonight by myself, Howard Bassett, and Sharon Sissons. I can confirm that the meeting is quorate to proceed, Chair.
Apologies.
No apologies, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item of business are the minutes of the planning meeting held on the 14th of December. Are members happy to approve these minutes as a correct record of all proceedings? And this will be done by a roll call by Howard Bassett.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bialik.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Branston.
Present. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Fowle.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hannaford.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Henson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Sparks.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Williams. Councillor Williams. I can see Councillor Williams.
Yeah.
I think she said yes. Councillor Morse.
Agreed.
Thank you. The minutes are taken as correct, Chair, for signing.
Thank you, Howard. At some point in the future, I imagine there'll be a physical copy for me to sign.
Indeed.
The next item on the agenda is item 3, declarations of interest. If any members have any disclosable pecuniary interests that relate to business on the agenda and have not already been included in the register of interests, to declare them before any discussion takes place on the item. And Councillor Sparks, I believe you have an interest.
Yes, I own neighbouring property to Dryden Road application.
Thank you. You just mention it again before you disappear from the meeting, and we'll be able to push you into a little side room while we discuss that item on the agenda. The next item of business is item 4, Local Government Access to Information Act 1985, for the exclusion of the public and press, and there are no part 2 items on this agenda, which brings us through to item 5 on the agenda. Now, if you've read the update sheet, you'll see there's been a dramatic change in the recommendation on this application, so please listen very carefully to Paul Jeffrey when he explains this if you've not read any of the other details. Thank you. Paul, over to you.
Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. Please nod if you can. Yep.
Paul, you can't hear you.
We can see your screen, but you might need to speak up a little bit. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me at all?
That's much
Very
better.
low.
Just
Really?
keep it clear and loud, please.
I'll try and turn it up as much as I can. Right, okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, great, excellent.
Ah,
Okay,
that's better.
As Councillor Morse has mentioned, the first point to make is the fact that there's been a change in the officer's recommendation from refusal to approval. Details of the revised application are contained within the additional information sheet that members have got. This application seeks outline planning permission with all matters reserved except for access for up to 200 dwellings. The site is accessed off Hillbarton Road via Myrtlebury Way alongside the recently approved Persimmon site for 47 houses. Met Office is situated in this location. There's Hillbarton, access is through the site. This is my cursor will just show you roughly where the site is going to go. That's the proposed site. The site is allocated in a site identified, and so I'll show you with my cursor where the site is allocated for strategic housing in the Hillbarton and Monkerton master plan, which accepts the principle of housing on the site. Previously, consent was granted on this site in 2013, but this has now lapsed. I'll just provide you with a few photographs just to provide a little bit of context. This one is taken from Membry Crescent, looking across the site towards the Met Office. The lighter parcel of land here is where the previously approved Persimmon site was. This next photograph is just looking alongside the axis. You'll see properties in Membry Crescent on the ridge to the left-hand side. This is looking up the other way from the access. The Persimmon site is on the left-hand side here. This is looking again towards properties in Membry House. All this site is the application site.
No,
okay. The application is in outline, but the applicants have provided a fairly detailed illustrative plan that you'll see on your screen. Just for orientation, the Met Office is to the bottom of the screen. This is the Persimmon site that was approved at committee recently. These are the existing residential properties in Membry Crescent. Okay, so as previously mentioned, the officer's recommendation has been amended. The report sets out in some detail the fundamental dispute that has been the provision of on-site affordable housing. Originally, the applicant proposed 25% affordable housing on the site, which fell short of the policy compliant 35%. The applicants pointed out that the 2013 consent only required 25%. However, your office has maintained that this would only be acceptable if a viability appraisal was undertaken. Whilst the application did undertake this viability, it resulted in a revised offer of only 10%, which represented only 20 residential units, affordable units, out of a possible total of 200. The council's viability assessor maintained that 35% was still viable. Consequently, given the significant differences in what affordable housing could be achieved between the applicant's viability appraiser and the council's appraiser, your officers considered that there remained no option but to recommend refusal. However, just prior to the additional information sheet being sent out to members last Friday, the applicants confirmed in writing that they would agree to a policy-compliant affordable housing provision on site of 35%. Subject to a clause in the 106 agreement that required that allowed this to be reviewed if circumstances change, which is a fairly standard clause in a 106 agreement. Consequently, this has led to the change in the recommendation to approval with conditions that members will see on the update sheet. Members will also note that the additional comments make reference to the open space and play provision. These comments were made to ensure that the small deficiency in the level of open space within the site were compensated through future applications for development of the Ridgeline Park to the north of this site. Detailed discussions have taken place with the applicant and the council's public realm officer regarding this space and the equipment needed, including a mugger. This would accord with the intentions of the Hill Barton Master Plan. Whilst the suggestion of a bond was made to guarantee these works, the applicants have stated today that contractually they would be unable to enter into such a 106 agreement requirement. They have stated that the application should be determined in the same way as a persimmon application on the adjacent site, where it was accepted that the future outline application would provide for the shortfall in open space. The applicants repeated this afternoon their firm intention to submit the final application for Hill Barton, which will include the Ridgeline Park, including open space, mugger and play spaces, and highlighted the ongoing detailed discussions with the council's public realm officer. Whilst there is no reason to doubt the applicant's intentions, and indeed a draft open space play area layout has been seen, there currently exists no guarantees in planning terms that this will be provided. Your officers consider that there are differences between the persimmon application for 47 houses and this scheme for up to 200 houses. It should be noted that the local plan policy, DG5, requires sites of more than 50 dwellings to provide on-site open space and equips children's play areas. Consequently, it is considered that a condition to provide a policy-compliant open space is justified for this site. However, bearing in mind the applicant's intentions, it would be possible for a suitably worded condition to justify a reduction in the open space requirements if the Ridgeline Park's open space and play areas were forthcoming. This would be a reasonable approach to ensure appropriate levels of open space for this site if the future application was delayed. Although the applicant has expressed a reluctance to accept such a condition, for the reasons given above, it does seem justified. In conclusion, as previously stated, the principle of housing was originally improved in outline in 2013, and the site lies within the strategic housing allocation Hill Barton site. The application will make a significant contribution towards the council's 5-year housing supply and provide up to 70 affordable homes based on a 200-unit scheme. The additional information sheet states a significant financial contribution of over £385,000 towards sustainable transport measures and an education contribution of over £679,000 towards special education and secondary schools. Consequently, the recommendation is for approval, subject to the amendment that the applicant is not required to enter into a bond requiring future open space, which is outside their control, but a condition requiring 10% open space with a flexibility to reduce it if facilities are provided within subsequent outline application. As I say, members, the recommendation is now to approve with the conditions as you've seen on your update sheet. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Do any of the planning committee members have questions for clarification? Got Councillor Hannaford's got his hand up.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for that update. Because without that, I certainly would have found it very difficult to support this application. It's just really to question you on the latter half of your presentation. You will know in Westex we've had some very bad experiences with play areas that are still not really properly adopted, that flood, they don't get proper maintenance regimes, etc. How sure are you that the quite detailed explanation you've given us on this arrangement will actually be robust enough to be tested, and in the light of the developers not actually coming through or reneging on that development? Because I know, certainly my colleagues in Exwick and I have spent a huge amount of time on certain areas in the area exactly under these sort of circumstances. So I would be concerned that we were, passing something today and then the members for that area would have to bear a similar burden. Thank you.
Paul, are you
If I
able
can
to?
answer, yes,
Yeah.
yes, by all means, yeah. I think if you look at this application, really, if you look at it as an entity, we are saying within the conditions that there's a requirement for 10% affordable housing on the plan that you see in front of you. This is an illustrative plan, so it will change. But although at the moment there is a deficiency in the open space, which is why we're requiring the condition for open space, we would, if seen as an entity, we would ensure that 10% open space is provided and play equipment is provided on this site. I'm sorry, it's a kind of detailed explanation, but really because the Hill Barton master plan allowed for the open space to be provided to the north of the site on the ridgeline park, it actually sort of passed over some of that open space requirements onto the bigger park area, and that's likely to happen. But what my explanation is really to make sure that we don't miss out on this particular application, and we ensure that if that fails for whatever reason, then we still have the opportunity of providing open space and play areas on this particular site, which would be policy compliant.
Thank you, Paul. I've got Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Henson. So you can pop your hand down now, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Paul, I've just got a couple of questions. First one is again regarding the open space and play areas. And I understand the approach that you've taken here. Please, can you tell me, are there any, you've said that you're in discussion and negotiation about the Ridgeline Park, but is there a timescale or are there any other developments upon which this is dependent? One. And two, I've got a highways question, which is that there's some talk about provision of bus stops and so on and so forth. So I assume we're looking at a service to be provided through the estate here. And my question here is, given the current pandemic, that bus services will return on a commercial basis to their previous level before the pandemic, never mind increased bus services. And I note that the revised Pinho area access strategy relies heavily on bus provision. And I just wondered if you'd done any further work with the highways officers regarding congestion and other such matters on Hill Barton Road, because that's where the sole access to this site is, if it were to be that bus services were not to be at a satisfactory level. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. If you could help.
Yes, by all means, yeah. And I think in terms of the other, what could be holding it up in terms of like the open space requirements, is I think that's the reason for my slight cautiousness in the application, in terms of like resting everything on the fact that there'll be a future application coming. I think it's right that we have some kind of like control over what happens on this site. So the intention is, and I know for the last 6 months, probably longer, that the applicant and the public realms officer have been in detailed conversations about this particular kind of this site, and they have kind of like got to a position whereby they're putting things on a plan and discussing very much details of where play equipment should be and where it shouldn't be within the site. So I have seen a plan showing that. It's not a public document, so you're not seeing this in front of you today, but certainly it's fairly well advanced in terms of what they intend to do. So that's likely to happen, but what I'm saying in terms of like the need for this requirement on site is to make sure that if that doesn't happen, then this actually will come ahead with a policy compliant amount of public open space and children's equipment on this particular site, which is what we'd expect for normally in any particular application. So I think that's right to have that kind of like bit of guarantee that we're going to get some open space and some play provision for this particular site, but it's likely to come about as part of the Ridgeline Park. In terms of the bus stops, and as you'll see, there is a condition there that requires them to be located. I think it's almost a difficult question for me to answer, really, in terms of like whether the bus services will come back in the kind of the degree that they were previously. I think the intention is that will happen. I think part of the transport contribution is to support that approach, but clearly we're not in control of the bus services, so I think it'd be quite difficult for me to give you, and I won't want to give members any guarantee that indeed will happen. The likelihood is that we can provide those kind of provisions within the site, i.e. to make sure the roads are sufficient to provide kind of bus travel to and from, passing one another, and also provide bus stops. So I think all we can do within the kind of the planning side of it is to allow that to happen. Obviously, we can't control the bus companies. That's out of our control, and I wouldn't want to give members any guarantee of that.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Bialik.
Yes, thank you. Talking about the planning application, I want to be clear, you did mention it, Paul, that this area has already been identified within the plan for strategic housing. And if that is the case, therefore, any principled opposition to, let's say, housing as a matter of principle is not a consideration we could refuse it on, because it is part of the strategic allocation. And secondly, with the remarks about the play equipment or the open space, that is provided for, or you've got a fallback position, which is policy compliant. Am I correct in assuming all of that?
Yes, yes to both of them. It is a strategic housing site that we previously approved. It is identified in the master plan. We did approve it previously in outline. This is really kind of renewing that the principle of housing on that site, which we want to see. And clearly, it's 200 houses, quite a significant amount of houses. And with this kind of the affordable housing now at 35% of policy compliant, that's gone up from 20 houses to 70 houses, affordable housing on the site, which again is quite significant. And in terms of the fallback position, yes, that allows us to provide a policy compliant open space and play equipment on this particular site as part of a reserve matters application. This is an outline application. Clearly, we can look at the details again when that comes in, but the condition it needs to be on now to make sure that that's what the future intention is. And it may not be required to have play equipment on this site. It might be provided as part of the Ridgeline Park, but this condition ensures that we at least get something.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Henson. Councillor Henson, you're muted. Sorry.
Is that better? Now you can hear me. What I was saying is it's mostly a legal matter. What it's going on to what Phil had said, Phil Bialik had said. This was on the cards as 2013. Way back, this is over 7 years ago. What I'm asking is, as we had looked at this back in 2013, legally we had agreed to a smaller amount of affordable accommodation, and now has come back. And that was done under the national plan, and I presume it still is the national plan. The requirement is now, we've agreed on 35, which I quite agree with. I'm not against that at all. Have we opened ourselves for legal challenge at this at some time or other? And my second question is the fact that what are we sacrificing to take in a smaller size, bigger amount of affordable accommodation? Is it smaller size rooms to this site? And the room size is what we would be sacrificing. I'm only asking this point is that you're sacrificing on families who really need rooms for growing up children in an area of this ilk. It's just 2 points of clarification, really, of legal side, that when it's not going to come back and bite us at some time or other.
Thank
Okay,
you.
in answer to those, I mean, no, there won't be any comeback in legal terms, because what we've gone through is a viability study. So both sides have carried out viability appraisals and got to the point whereby there was some disagreement to start with, but now we've come to an agreement that it should be 35%. So both parties in writing have agreed that that is indeed the case. So I think, you know, we have come to a point where it's policy compliant, and also a point where the applicant has agreed with us that that is the correct figure. And I think in terms of like your question about room sizes, we're not at that stage yet, really. That this will come about as part of the Reserve Matters application when we look at individual properties, and clearly we'll have to make sure that they're policy compliant and they meet national standards in terms of like in terms of room sizes and things of that nature. But it's very much an illustrative plan. It's an indication that they can potentially get 200 houses on this site. They may not, but it's up to 200. So clearly we want to maximise the site as much as possible, but clearly we want to ensure that there's sufficient open space and all the houses meet the correct space standards, both in terms of their building dimensions and also external spaces. So we'll look at that. That's for future consideration as part of any Reserve Matters application.
Well, can I, Chair, can I say, I'm thankful for that, but I think we really got to keep an eye on the size of the rooms that we are agreeing to.
But we're not agreeing
because
to any
that
room
is one of
sizes
the
at this
things
point.
that could be sacrificed.
Councillor Henson,
All right,
if you
thank you,
listen,
Paul.
if you listen to Paul, what he's explaining at the moment is we don't have room sizes. We don't know what any of the building
I know.
is outlined. So
I'm just asking for us to be vigilant. Thank you.
Right. We now have a member of the public speaking on the application. Can I ask Lyndon Bent, who is speaking against the application, to speak, please? You have 3 minutes to speak on the item and you'll be advised when the 3 minutes is up.
Thank you, Councillor. Good evening. My name is Lyndon Bent and I'm a resident of Rougemont Park. I'm here to represent the residents of Sidbury Close and Membury Crescent, just off of the Myrtlebury Way, and to support the objections made at initial application. I would like to make it clear that we, the residents, do not stand in objection to the principle of residential development on the adjoining land to us, but wish to voice our concern, our serious concerns, over the access and safety of this area of Hillbarton as a whole. The outcome of this larger scale site is pivotal to the enjoyment and safety of the existing residents of Hillbarton Vale and Rougemont Park, and that of future development of the wider area sharing access under the Pinho-Munkerton structure plan. So to our points we wish to raise, having now seen the DCC Highways consultation reply and the additional information you referred to earlier, we observe that this application forms the likelihood of 100 more properties than the original structure plan, while the current access to the existing development is already under considerable strain, particularly at Heritage Way and Peppercombe Avenue. We are unsure when the trip generation recording was undertaken, but we would contend that if this was at any stage during the pandemic since March 2020, that this is not a true reflection of normal usage, and the residents observe government travel restrictions. It is optimistically noted that highways make reference to double yellow lines through the estate. However, we are concerned that should this be left to the stage of adoption of the roads, there could be several years of congestion, particularly with the extra pressure of construction traffic. For example, the adoption of the roads on Rougemont Park has not been completed in over 5 years, and necessary road markings and traffic calming remain absent. We are delighted with the recommendation of an additional children's play area, or LEAP. However, our fears are over the undoubted additional usage of the existing LEAP at the junction of Peppercombe Avenue and Huncham Road. This area already provides serious concern for the safety of children playing on the green area, not screened from the busy road access by any form of safety fencing. In conclusion, we therefore ask that build density is curtailed, the provision of yellow lines, traffic management and calming is set as a condition prior to the commencement of construction, Furthermore, that the safety of the existing children's play area is enhanced by safety fencing surrounding the play equipment, which is commonplace elsewhere. We seek the reassurance from the Planning Committee
3 minutes are up, Chair.
taken into account and when deliberating your decision.
3 minutes are up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bent. If you could stop, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Do any members have any questions for Mr. Bent, if he's happy to take them? Can't see any hands waving. Is anyone waving at me? No, it looks as though everybody is happy with your statement, Mr. Bent. You're welcome to sort of turn off your camera and your microphone and hide in the background, but please don't interrupt the meeting now. We're proceeding. Thank you. Okay, the application is now open for debate. Are there any members who wish to speak on the application? And can I also have a big screen back so I can see everybody at once, just in case someone is waving at me? And then Councillor Hannaford, you're first on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Originally, I was rather disappointed that this application was coming before the Planning Committee because there were obviously lots of problems, detailed issues within it. But the obvious issue was the offer of 10% affordable and social housing, which clearly is unacceptable. We know the desperate need that we've got in the city for affordable and social housing, and we've got to do everything that we can to make sure that we do hit our target. So I'd like to place on record, firstly, my thanks, and I'm sure the thanks of all the committee for the officers for sticking to their guns and working, obviously tenaciously to make sure that is agreed. I mean, clearly this site was always going to be developed for housing. It was in the local plan, and the only issues I think for us are to make sure that it's done, within the guidelines and obviously with sustainability issues taken into account. So I think I'm certainly happy to move the recommendation for approval on the amended plans. I would like to add, though, as well, I do hope that the development goes smoothly, and I do hope that the play area and green space issues are resolved fully, because I have to say, Chair, it's my experience, and I'm sure others share them over the past few years, certainly over the past 10 years, that it's very regrettable that developers, put play areas and green spaces in the plans. Quite often young families buy properties and move into the area because there's a play area that's next to them or near them, and then there are all sorts of issues, and and even in terms of Westex and particularly Exwick, sadly, families moved in, children grew up, and the issues around the play areas still weren't resolved. So I do hope that this goes smoothly and well. And listening to the gentleman who spoke just now, in moving the recommendation for approval, could we also please add in some sort of provision to make sure that we get the safety fencing that he's talking about around the existing play area? I think this is an issue that Councillor Sutton raised on a pinhole planning application before Christmas, which was very important. To protect the children's safety, and I think if there's an opportunity to do so through this application, as members, I think we ought to specifically mention that and get that taken on as part of the approval. Thank you very much, Chair.
I've got Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Harvey, and after that we'll come back and speak to Paul about the safety fencing, okay?
Thank you, Chair. I thought many of the comments made by Mr. Bent were extremely valid and helpful in a way. And I wondered if Paul could reply to some of the issues he's raised there, so we can hopefully give the local residents some reassurance.
Okay, I'll take Councillor Harvey as well, rather than, and give Paul a second to think about those, and then we'll get him to come back at the end of it all. Okay, Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, I think I'm underlining comments made by others. I fully appreciate that this is part of the Monckton Master Plan. Fully appreciate that comments have been made by Highways. But I do go to Hillbarton Vale on a regular basis, and the traffic isn't ideal. And given the current situation in which play areas are now left to the developer, who then, under usual circumstances, makes arrangements with a grounds maintenance contractor to look after them. it isn't necessarily always ideal either. I am very well aware of the play area that the public speaker spoke about, and it is quite true. It's on the junction of a busy road, and there are no safety fences whatsoever to protect the children. It certainly wouldn't be adequate anymore, but hopefully these will be built. And I just hope that the promises made to planning officers, because I didn't have a proper inquiry to my answer, Paul. My answer was not how is our play area is going to be provided, but do you have a timescale at which you would say that the main play area to the north of the site hadn't been built successfully, and therefore you would expect the play area on the site to be built? I have heard no dates yet, and I'd be grateful to hear those added into the conditions. Thank you.
Paul, are you able to answer those questions, which I've now completely lost track of? I hope you picked them up.
I will try and remember them, but obviously I know members will correct me if I miss any. So, please forgive me if I do so. I think in terms of the safety fencing, clearly that's outside this particular application. But I think it's something that we should look into. And obviously this developer is part of a consortium that's developed the whole scheme. So I'm quite happy to pass that back to the consortium and just see why that hasn't been done, if that was part of the original scheme for safety fencing around the existing play area. But in terms of trying to kind of link that to this application, I think that will be more difficult, but it's not, because it's not directly related. But I certainly will. I made a note of going back to the consortium to have a look at that. In terms of jumping around a little bit, in terms of Councillor Harvey's question about timescales, I think it's really difficult to put a particular timescale in and when the future the Ridgeline Park will come into play. However, what I think it depends on how this application pans out, in terms of we would ensure if there was no application for the Ridgeline Park, then clearly the insistence on providing play equipment and open space on this site becomes even more important. So that's something that we would insist on. So that's definitely a timescale that we would adhere to, because we would have to become part of the Reserve Matters application came in. That's when that comes in. However, I think the outline application is coming through fairly shortly, but I wouldn't want to give you any kind of time scale saying when that is, because I haven't got any control about that. Just then going back to some of the highway questions that have been raised. I mean, clearly we've got a highway officer's report that very clearly says that this is acceptable. There's a number of conditions that have been attached. I think in response to some of the points that the objector raised in terms of when the actual figures were taken, they would have been pre-pandemic, because this application, as you probably see from the number, has been around for quite a while, and they would have actually had to provide those details before they submitted the application. So those figures would be pre-pandemic. I think in terms of the requirements for double yellow lines and improvements to that is part of the traffic regulation order that you'll see as part of the 106 agreement is a requirement to actually provide. So they would actually have to improve those elements of it to actually improve access and making sure. I know these cars are parked on the access, so that's something that would be looked at as well. So I know the highway engineer has spent quite a lot of time with the applicants, and partly the reason for the delay in getting it to committee, to actually ensure that as many of the highway issues that have been raised as possible can be addressed. Hopefully that answers some of your questions, if not all of them.
Thank you, Paul. Speaking as a former county councillor for the Pinhoe area, and I'm sure Councillor Hannaford will correct me if I'm wrong. First of all, it's not a planning matter for us, because all we can do is ask that those things are put in place. My understanding is that none of those orders are able to be processed till Devon County adopts the land, and Devon County won't adopt the land until the developers have made the road suitable for their adoption. Otherwise, Devon County become liable for them. So I think you get into a massive negotiation, which is very uncomfortable for the people who live there. And I have every sympathy with Mr. Bent about it. But through the planning system, we aren't able to overcome the legal implications of how you have to adopt land before you can put traffic orders on them, I'm afraid. Anybody else wishing to speak on this application? Nope, no one else wants to speak. Okay, then we'll take this. I'll just before we completely move forward, I think this application is not without its problems, but it's also without a lot of very good points and is part of an already adopted strategic plan for the area to provide much needing housing, including 35% affordable housing in the area. So I'm happily going to vote for this application. Shall we move to the vote?
Chair, do you want to second her? I think we got a Councillor Hannaford moved.
Yep. Anyone want to second? Just wave your hand. Councillor
I'll
Sutton or
second.
Fowl.
Thank you.
Right, and then
Okay.
if we can move to the vote, please, Howard.
Certainly, members can vote if they're voting for or against or abstaining, please. Councillor Bialik.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Branston.
For.
Thank you.
For.
Councillor Fowle.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hannaford.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Henson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Sparks.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Williams. I think Councillor Williams, perhaps if you could indicate by your hand to wave.
She's nodding her head, if that helps.
Right. Thank you.
She's put a green tick on her screen, which I assume is indicating a positive endorsement.
Councillor Morse.
For.
Thank you. The recommendation as amended in the update sheet is carried with 12 votes in favour and 1 abstention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Howard. Moving on to item 6, Councillor Sparks. I think you need to declare your interest to leave the room.
Yes, please.
Thank
Please
you.
leave the room. Thank you.
So item 6, Flying Horse at Dryden Lane. Lee Powell or Roger Clotworthy, one of you two are going to make the presentation?
Yes, it's Lee.
Okay, over to you, Lee.
Just bear with me, I'm just trying to share my screen.
Thank you. Fine. Brilliant, we can see it now. Yep, it's there. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, this application wouldn't normally, it's a strange application. It wouldn't normally come before planning committee because there's no objections to it by the public, and no member or councillor has requested that it comes before you. So the main reason why it's here tonight is because the Constitution only allows us officers to proceed with drawing up Section 106's Section 106 agreements where the sums involved are below £10,000, and where they go above, you need to get your authorisation to proceed. And the trigger in this application is that the local education authority has requested that a payment of around £14,000 is paid to mitigate the impact of the scheme on local secondary schools. I should add that the applicant has agreed to pay that sum. The site is the former beer garden to the Flying Horse, which you may remember was a pub on Dryden Lane, on Dryden Road, closed I think about 5 years ago. We have subsequently granted planning permission for that building to convert to residential. And indeed, we've already established the principle of residential on the garden site, where in 2017 we granted consent for 2 dwellings. But this scheme is for a block, a modern 2-storey block of contemporary design for 4 flats. Just so that you are aware of the site, I'll show you some photographs. This is the access road, the existing access road. On the right there are properties in Dryden Road, as is the ones in front, and the Flying Horse is there on the left. So that's the existing access lane, and then the beer garden itself now looks like this. So quite different to how it would have looked when it was operating as a pub. But that's facing towards Bovymores Lane, where you can see properties there quite a way back in the background. And behind the fence there on the left are the gardens of Dryden Road. This is going back down towards the back
the flying horse there and that access lane you can see. And then on the other side, behind there, you can see a roof there. That is a property in Malvern Gardens. So, I mean, in broad terms, officers have got no objections to the seam, but I'll just show you the plans. There's the layout there showing building in grey. These red marked areas here are first floor balconies, and you'll see there's some walls sticking out there to prevent overlooking into the gardens that would be down here in Dryden Road. And a communal space there of about 130 square metres with a couple of private spaces for the flats that would be on the ground floor. This is the building. So a two-storey building like most others in the surrounding townscape, although clearly very different design to the sort of simple, modest design of most of the houses around there. But that said, given it's quite a discreet hidden location, and given that whilst it does have quite a bit of massing, it is broken up by quite a lot of variation in building lines, windows in deep reveals, and variation in materials, including red brick, render, and cladding. And you'll see that there is some parking spaces under this sort of undercroft here for the flats. In that behind that wooden fence there is where you would have the cycle store, and behind this one here is where you would have the bin store. And you can see here the balconies with what looks like some plants on it. In terms of internal space standards, they all meet the national standards. 72 square metres for two-bedroom flats would be just above the national minimum requirement, and obviously the external space at 133 square metres is well above what we would want in our local plan, which is about 80 square metres. Just in case I know there was a question asked me last week, the cladding material would, I found it on another building, it would look like this. The council doesn't currently have a 5-year supply of deliverable housing, and therefore we do have the presumption, regard to the presumption in favour of sustainable development, even though the contribution of 4 units is relatively modest. But the National Planning Policy Framework states that where housing policy is out of date, permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. We haven't identified any significant harmful impacts here. It's largely compliant with national and local policy, and therefore we recommend that planning permission is granted for the scheme.
Thank you very much, Lee. Do any members have any questions?
Councillor Gussain, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Gussain.
Thank you, Lee, for that presentation. Of course, I would welcome as a private ward that's in my that building is in my ward, so I welcome that development because it's been sitting there for some time. Anyway, my questions were 2 questions. The first one is clarification about, because there's an issue in the planning application about the cycles. If there is any, there are 8 cycle spaces, but is there any sheltered place for them? How they, because that is what one of the questions that have arisen. And the other question is, yeah, sorry, I can't remember the other question, but for this one, what happened with the cycles? Is there a roof container for them?
Well, that's what we would expect. We haven't, I don't think we've got the exact detail of the cycle storage, and it's not always usual for us to get it before we make a decision, but we would add a condition asking for those details, and we would certainly be asking that it's safe and secure and sheltered. Yes, definitely.
Okay, now I remembered my second question is something to do with how well it complies with any of our conditions about how much it complies with the energy sustainability requirements.
Yeah, we've got a policy approach of asking that energy efficiency is 19% better than the current building regulations. With any new build, again, we normally leave that as a condition for people to then supply how they're going to achieve that. I've never really come across it being a problem. If there are some shortfall, they usually add some solar panels or some sort of renewables that would get them comfortably to 19%. So we would normally put that on as a condition. We've no reason to think that they wouldn't be able to achieve that, and they're certainly aware that we would expect them to do that.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Councillor Bialik.
Yeah, I'm going to ask another question that I know the answer to. If it wasn't for the fact that this amount was over £10,000, the officers would have approved this and we wouldn't have even seen it. Am I right in assuming that? So I'm happy.
That's correct.
I'm happy that the developer is prepared to pay this amount over and above and not sort of taking it off of anything. So I'm quite happy with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bialik. I think you might be stepping ahead of me there. There are no public speakers. So if this is opening the debate, does anyone other than with what Councillor Bialik just said, does anyone else wish to speak? Doesn't look like it. In which case, Howard, could we move to the vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Is a mover and seconder, please?
Yep.
I'll move, Lord Mayor. Calling you Lord Mayor, don't I, Sam? I'll move, Chair.
I'll
Thank
second.
you.
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. And then we go to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bialik?
Agree. For.
Thank you. Councillor Branston?
Support.
Thank you. Councillor Fole?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Hannaford?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Henson?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton?
For.
Councillor Wright?
For.
Councillor Williams? I think if Councillor Williams can indicate. It's not clear, I'm afraid. Councillor Williams, Councillor Morse?
For.
Thank you. That is carried, Chair.
Thank you, Howard. Right then,
Councillor Williams has, sorry to interrupt, Chair.
Okay.
Councillor Williams has indicated she's voting for on the chat.
It's carried unanimously, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Howard. That takes us to item 7, the list of delegated decisions. Can I ask Roger Clotworthy to present, please?
Chair, before you go, can I ask just a point of order, and you can help me, because this doesn't normally happen. Page 80, the item under Exwick, of which I have an interest, we are noting it. I get we noting it, the decision's already been made. But do I have to declare an interest in noting that and that to be recorded? I mean, this doesn't normally happen. I've never remembered a member putting something through, you see. Does that need to be recorded that I've on page 80 of that item?
I didn't realise. Yeah, we made it as a committee decision, so it's just noting. So no one's influencing it in that way. So I can't see that's a problem.
That's all right. Okay.
I don't think so, because we made the decision at committee to follow due process.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry, going back to Roger. Do you want to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I've not been notified of any questions that members wish to ask on this item, so it's just a question of asking members to note the report. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we all have. And item 8, the final item of business, is the appeals decision. Can you present the report, please, Roger?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members are asked to note the 4 decisions that are explained in the report. 2 of them were allowed and 2 of them were dismissed, and we've also received 2 new appeals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Roger. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officers.
Thank you, Chair.